There are a lot of great TVs that you can buy this year and going into 2021, but if you want the best of the best, you want to be looking at one of these two TVs. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Caleb Dennison, and today we are comparing the LG C10, also read CX OLED, against the Sony A8H OLED. Two remarkable OLED TVs with a lot of similarities, in fact, more similarities than differences. So today we're going to take a look at everything from the aesthetics of the TV to the user interface, the sound, the picture quality, and we're going to get into gaming a little bit later. So let's do this. Aesthetically speaking, these TVs are very similar. They're both OLED, so they're both thinner than a pencil and have a very striking design. They're all going to look good on a stand or up on a wall. People will take notice when they walk into the room and see either one of these TVs. Where they differ, though, is in the stand. So with the LG C10 OLED, you get this brushed metal scoop stand that mounts to a small section in the back. It is extremely heavy. It's got something like 30 pounds of ballast back there. You'd think that would make for a more stable TV, but actually it kind of wobbles quite a bit. This stand isn't just for holding the TV up, though. That scoop is intentional and it affects the sound quality, which I'll talk about in a minute. With the Sony, you've got a more traditional foot-style stand. They're placed pretty close to the edge, so you do need a rather large stand to accommodate the TV. What you notice here is that it's really low slung. There's very little space between the bottom of the TV and whatever you set it on. So just like the LG, there's really no space for a sound bar if you're gonna stand mount this. Now, if you wall mount it, that's no big deal. So the TVs do need to sound good if you're only going to use the TV and not some elaborate home theater system, which I think the TV deserves, but they're not as popular these days. Anyway, we'll get to the sound in just a moment. Turning our attention to the back of the TVs, I want to talk about the HDMI inputs. With the LG C10, you're getting four 4K 120 HDMI 2.1 inputs. Now, they're limited this year at 40 gigabits per second. Last year, they were the full 48 gigabits per second. What that impacts, well, it's related to gaming, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. With the Sony, you don't get any true HDMI 2.1 inputs. It can handle EARC, but when it comes to things like variable refresh rate, that's not going to be available with this TV. More of that when we get to the gaming section. Now let's talk about the user experience. What's the day-to-day living with the TV like? Well, with the LG C10, you get WebOS, which I'm very familiar with. I've enjoyed it for a long time. I feel like it's getting a little bit stale, but there is a lot of functionality here. You get more picture presets than the Sony, like ISF calibrated dark and day mode, for instance. There's also filmmaker mode on this TV, which is great if you're kind of a purist. And then you've got some smart home integration so that you can control some of your smart home devices directly through the TV. The TV does support Google Assistant, but it actually has its own AI built in that handles most of your voice requests until it can't, and then it just hands it off to the Google Assistant. Overall, it works really well. With the Sony, you get Android TV, which I think is eventually going to be called Google TV. Anyway, it's Android TV right now, and it's historically been very difficult to run. But now Sony has this chip that makes it a very, very simple, fast experience. There's no lag when you press a button. It loads apps quickly. And speaking of apps, it's got just about any app that you could possibly ask for. It's a little bit vanilla as an interface, but it gets the job done. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot of improvements soon. Also runs Google Assistant, which is great at finding content that you want to watch, telling you where you can get it, how much it's going to cost, if it's going to cost anything at all, if it's free with a subscription. Overall, I like the interface. It's perfectly usable. It doesn't have as many picture preset options. You pretty much want to go with cinema on this one. Right out of the box, that looks great though. So at least there's not a lot of playing around that you have to do. Now let's talk about sound quality. The LG takes a more conventional approach with downfiring speakers, and the scoop of the stand actually projects that sound out at you. With the Sony, however, you have these transducers behind the actual screen. The screen itself makes sound, and that does some pretty cool tricks. For instance, if you have two people who are speaking on opposite sides of the screen, you're going to hear the voices come from two specific locations. And that's really cool for sound effects as well. Now, since those transducers don't make a lot of bass, there is a little subwoofer in the back of the Sony TV. And I got to tell you, it's a really effective system. It sounds pretty high fidelity, all things considered. Those localized sound effects are extremely impressive. Overall, the sound from the Sony is bigger, richer, and more exciting. Now for the part that I think most of you have been waiting for, let's talk about picture quality. I can sum it up this way. These TVs both look so outstanding, it's almost not worth comparing them. Almost, but we're gonna do it anyway. On the bright end of the spectrum, the LG definitely tends to bump up HDR highlights so that they have a little bit more luminance. On the Sony side, it isn't quite as punchy, but it is more detailed. And you can see that when you look at clouds like this. You can see that the Sony is showing more contrast in the clouds, whereas the LG is simply brighter. That kind of detail conversation also works down in the blacks. Both of these have excellent inky blacks, as you would expect. Coming out of black is difficult for both TVs, but the Sony tends to do a little bit better. And in general, it preserves more detail in the shadows than the LG. So if you're a hardcore cinema purist, you might prefer the Sony just for the extra detail that it gets. Now, the funny thing is, it has more detail, but because it isn't quite as contrasty in the extreme as the LG, you might almost get the feeling that the LG is more detailed. But when you really drill into it, you can see the Sony is a little bit better in those areas. As for color, again, extremely close. Now, the Sony, as all Sonys do, tend to have this sort of greeny tinge to it, but this is not something that you can see unless you're comparing TVs directly. There's no way you could walk into a room, look at one of these TVs, walk away for 5 minutes, come in and look at the other one and tell any difference at all. So when it comes to picture quality, technically, I'm gonna give it to the Sony because I do think it's executing a little bit better processing, very smooth motion, love it. The LG is not far behind though. Like I said, I think when it comes down to it, these TVs are about equal for most folks, but if you're a super picky guy like me, you might lean towards the Sony. Normally, that's where we would polish this video off, but we have one more thing to talk about, and that is gaming, because I believe it's the linchpin to the argument about which TV is better. Simply put, the Sony was not built for gaming and the LG was. I talked earlier about those HDMI 2.1 4K 120 Hz ports that are in the back of the LG. That's a real forward-thinking thing for LG to do. It partnered with NVIDIA a year ago. It's been working on this for quite some time. The launch was, a little bit botched, but hey, it's a first-time deal, right? The bottom line is the next-gen consoles and PC gaming is gonna look fantastic on this TV, and it can do things that the Sony simply cannot. Yes, there are a few bugs, but those bugs are gonna be fixed with a firmware update that I will personally have in hand very soon. And in fact, I'm gonna do an entire video centered around this TV and gaming so that you can see for yourself what it can or cannot do. But it is light years ahead of the competition. It is made to be a great gaming TV, and I think that's really important now, more so than ever before. It used to be that TVs couldn't really compete with high-end gaming monitors. Now they can, and that changes the conversation. So at the end of the day, in the battle between the LG C10 OLED and the Sony A8H, I'm gonna have to call it for the LG. It's simply a more advanced television with amazing picture quality. If you are a picture quality purist and you don't care about anything else, buy the Sony with confidence. It's an outstanding TV. I personally love it, but I think for most folks, the LG OLED is the winner here. Thanks as always, everyone, for watching. This was a really fun video to make, but what about that next video, that gaming video with the 48-inch C10 OLED? What kind of games do you want to see us play? What kind of settings are you concerned about? Leave me a comment down below, like, subscribe, definitely hit that notification bell, and as always, visit digitaltrends.com for the latest tech news and reviews.